reflect the light, so they'll look very pale. So you can start recognizing these colors and say, oh, that's probably in the family to which this moss belongs, the Podiaceae, and you just start from that family. This is another very common species on cliffs, and this is like a little dicranum, a little broom moss. It's very small. It grows on trails. One of the many unusual projects I've done in the past with my students is studying the impact of trampling on mosses, and this is a moss that does very well when trampled and is commonly found on trails. So basically, these species both would reproduce very vigorously by fragmentation. Okay, so when you get into the bigger mosses, that in mosses 2 centimeters is considered big, so so fairly small. You get some really attractive species. This is the wrinkled broom moss, which you can find at Cathedral. Is just a very beautiful moss. The Appalachian petty moss there also has a very beautiful male flowers, and the leaves are very large. You can find that in seeps. And then there is the common Bazzania. Many liverworts are named for Italians who were patrons of the study of mosses. And I kind of like that, just as it is, Bazzania. Why not just call it the common Bazzania? Have any of you been to Gaudenir Forest? You see this in mass, just covering the ground of the spruce forest, and it's associated with that rare salamander, cheap-bound salamander that grows there. There is a real affinity of amphibians for mossy habitats. I guess that's partly why I like them both so much. They just seem to kind of go together for multiple reasons. Okay, so the general trend with growth forms in mosses is that the more humid the atmosphere, the taller the bryophytes tend to get. The taller and looser. It's similar to what you see with the lichens, where you get these beard lichens, which are really loose, and the ramilinus kind of spread all over too. Basically, they're foraging. You might not think of mosses and lichens as foraging, but that's what they're doing. It's just that you need time-lapse photography to see that's what they're doing. It used to be thought that only lichens can extract vapor from the air, that mosses have to have rain. But it has now been found that to some degree they can absorb water right out of the air and get what they call pre-hydrated before they get fully hydrated with the rain. So not surprising perhaps that in both groups you get taller or looser growth forms in more humid conditions. So yes, you see this kind of thing only in very optimal conditions. And you'll notice that though you think of liverworts as lying flat on the ground, as they more typically do, if you've got a humid environment, they may grow upright and form a turf like this. So this is what you would expect to grow as a mat, growing as a tall turf. All right, peat mosses, we won't run into on our walk, but everybody needs to know about peat mosses. They're kind of like a specialized tall turf. They have these mop-like heads that are just unmistakable. You don't really need to see the sporophytes, which you can readily see in certain species that tend to be fertile, but they're very unusual in that they operate like top guns. The pressure builds up inside them like that you would have in one of these 16-wheelers, and then under the right conditions, the lid is blown off and the spores go out. So my advisor in graduate school at Tennessee, was well-known moss specialist A.J. Sharp, had been out in the bogs and heard the popping of the exploding peat mosses. I have not yet heard that. So You know, that's on my bucket list. I don't know, what's on your bucket list? Maybe I need to go to, I don't know, far north, I guess, and wander around the bogs. But look at how different these unmistakable sphagnum species look, and the color and the fatness of the leaves, whether sporophytes are produced. These are extremely social plants. Basically, in nature, they don't have rhizoids. Instead, they just lean on each other. So they're a very good example of depending on others. They just lean on each other and form a turf. And they, well, they help make habitats waterlogged and acid, but actually, if you have a forest being converted into a bog, usually that's primarily the rising water table, but the peat mosses are so good at holding water, and they do release some acids that they contribute to the process. But recently it's been found that some of those bog waters that are thought to be mainly the acid was from sphagnum was actually from other organic acids from humidification. So there's always more to learn. Okay, so there is a red peat moss, and there's a very common bluntleaf peat moss, the golden form, and that's the one there is a fringe peat moss. Very different looking.
How do you differentiate the peat mosses from the starbursts?
From the star moss? Oh, well, one thing is, you'll notice that the color is really pale, and that's because, like leucobrium, they have lots of dead, empty cells that could hold water and air. So especially when they dry out, they will look like nothing else. And you wouldn't confuse this with leucobrium because, you know, it's a turf. It's not usually a cushion, and it has these branches, a very distinctive mophead of branches. The star moss here, if this were a star moss, each of these branches would be a leaf. So you have them radiating out from a center, but it's leaves rather than branches. So, you know, those, very good question. That's the kind of thing you start to notice with mosses. If I'm looking at a leaf or a branch, when I'm looking at the pattern, that's actually one of the most important things to notice. So I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so this is more what you expect of liverworts. You expect smooth match. You expect them to be hugging the substratum. They tend to be much more delicate than mosses. They have these big, beautiful cells. If they have any wax on the surface, it's extremely thin. They dry out readily. So, and you notice they really don't look like, they just don't look like mosses. They look a little different. They don't, when mosses are flattened, what you've got is spirally arranged leaves that have just been flattened. But with liverworts, you've got 3 rows of leaves. So it's really a distinctive look. But although they're generally, you find liverworts in shadier, moister habitats, there are a few species that are adapted to drying out. And we will see, we will at least see Frulania, which is one of my favorite liverworts, and we'll keep our eyes open for others. Frulania, of the name I made up for it is cupwort, because on the underside it has little cup-like lobes in which there are virtually always wheel animals or rotifers living. It's just an amazing association that's been noted since the late 1800s and is now under research in some universities, at least one university. There's something going on there. So where you have Frulania, you have rotifers. But many liverworts will have little pockets that hold water, so they might actually have enough water to metabolize for several days after a rain. Then, if you've had a general botany course, you might have seen this liverwort, Marcandia. The liverwort, if people know any liverwort, it's usually this one, which is structured almost like the leaf of a vascular plant. It's thick It has pores, which you can see here, which can regulate moisture loss, and that's what you might find even in a place like Australia, in the right habitats, or in the Mediterranean in dry areas. So in this case, it was in a vineyard in British Columbia. Okay, so then here you see, this is a flat, shiny moss. It doesn't look like a liverwort. Here you can see that it's not just 2 or 3 rows of leaves, it's lots of leaves that have been flattened. So the branches lie flat, whereas in the rough mats, you have a main creeping stem, but the branches will be upright, and so you're more likely to see more of those where it's wetter. So this is the beautiful satin moss, and again, I love these names from this is the common mosses of the Northeast and the Appalachians, which I was happy to review for Princeton University Press and give it very good ratings. I thought it was just a great contribution. So those do look like little foxtails, don't you think? And the moss is kind of satiny over here. Okay, so then basically as it gets a little looser, you go from a weft, which is just the term for when it's the branches aren't quite lined up into a neat turf. Instead, it's just sort of going off in all directions. It's called a weft, and the growth forms will grade into one another. And of course, foraging is usual for water, light, and nutrients. So you expect to find these in very humid habitats. I first got interested in mosses when I took a course as an undergraduate at Carleton College in Minnesota, where we went up into the Boundary Waters area, the field botany course, and the instructor was a bryologist. So I decided I wanted to become a bryologist too, the technical name for a specialist in mosses and liverworts, although I've always loved lichens, and I was happy to curate the lichens as well as the mosses at WVU, and more than happy to supervise Mack's project on the lichens. So the lichens are beautiful in a different way than mosses are, and they often grow together, so it's great to have an interest in both. But here you can see some common species. This one, very common, which we will see in the field, and I've got a couple of branches of it in the dishes. And Knight's plume, have any of you ever seen this? Oh, it is a beautiful moss. Here, again, the key question is it a leaf or a branch? What do you think this is? Is this a leaflet, do you think, or is it a branch? It's a branch. So this is a fern-like branching pattern. Here is the main stem, just like the main stem on a pine tree. And then, as on the pine tree, you have branches coming off from the side. And the overall effect, in this case, is of a beautiful fern-like shoot. The pine tree would have branches coming off on all sides, but here they're basically in one plane on either side, and you get this very beautiful plume-like moss. And here again, the one you will all know, I'm sure, after the walk, the brocade moss. I used to call it the flat fern moss. My former student calls it the brocade moss. I guess this reminds some people of brocade. That's, I guess, ornamentation on clothes or something. Does that mean anything to you, brocade? So does it seem like a good name? I've adopted it since I like their names in general. But it's a beautiful moss, and you can see the straight, diagnostic straight capsules. Okay, and then as it gets wetter, you can get some mosses that really do look like little trees with the branches going off in all directions. And I remember as an undergraduate up in the North Woods, struggling through the underbrush, and there was this beautiful, that looked like a miniature scene from the tropics, all these little palm trees. It was really the beautiful dendrite moss, Climacean, and that got one of the things that got me interested in bryophytes, along with the Frulenia that always has rotifers in it. At Cathedral, one of the most beautiful and unusual mosses is the shingle moss, Necra pinnata, which grows out at a right angle to the tree. That's called a fan growth form. Need really high humidity for that. And that's a moss of special interest since it is declining worldwide. You'll find quite a bit of literature on Necra pinnata. What it likes is like hardwoods scattered among conifers, like in the Cathedral with the oak trees among the hemlocks, perfect habitat. But it has the problem of jumping from one oak to another, so there's a limitation to getting around. It has a special problem. In Scandinavia, in managing for Necra, they just cut down the conifers. They're in the way. Necra needs to get to the oaks. They cut down the conifers that they think are blocking its spread, because they take very seriously protecting this species. Now, this may be something you're familiar with, seeing mosses used in arts and crafts. And that's, I'll have to confess, I couldn't resist buying this one in Asheville. It was just too cute. And I mean, you see this all over the world. So that was one in Asheville. I was just going to take a picture of it, but it was so cute I had to buy it. And then in the Pyrenees in Spain, they were selling these branches covered with mosses and paper flowers. Very recently in California, whoops, let me get back there. In California, we went to, they called the Fairy Garden House, where it was a greenhouse just filled with things like this. Little cottages made of moss. The West Virginia Botanic Garden has a fairy garden where kids can make little things. Yeah, and so this was like professionals doing how they would do it, and they had all these crystals and stuff by it. They were really quite interesting and used both mosses and lichens. And in Chicago, and here's a real quiz. This is mosses and lichens. Anybody guess what the lichen is here? Look at that. See that network?
Well, it looks like the part of the area there.
It's actually, it's Peltigera.
Oh, that's the point.
Yeah, on the some of the
Oh, the
dog
underside.
lichen on the underside.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this is upside down dog lichens or pelt lichens, and then various bryophytes. I thought that was really quite striking. So, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Would you think about using mosses and lichens in arts and crafts? And any views on that?
If you grow your own, but I don't know if they're growing their own, are they?
Pardon?
Are they growing their own? Of course not.
Yeah. Actually, this is another area that I have researched, and actually Emily helped with the field work for a project where we looked at the mosses being sold in Raynell, which is actually the center for selling mosses gathered, harvested from the forests, where at that time at least they could even legally harvest in the Mon Forest, pay 50 cents for a bag, and then take it to the dealer in Raynell and get $5 for a bag of moss. 20 bags, they've got $100 worth of pocket change that's not recorded.
I live over near Babcock State Park, and they have a big problem with moss theft there. That you go down past the grist mill toward the cabins, and you'll see like moss stuff, and there people are going and stealing it to sell.
Yeah,
And it's right outside of Raynell.
It's a real serious problem. Yeah, And so what I publish is what species are in the moss bags and so on, what is commonly sold. And number 1 was the Thwidium, the delicate fern moss. Number 2 was the brocade moss, which, you know, is so beautiful, wet or dry, that is, you will, it's always really gotten my goat that you will go into a mall and see a plastic fig, and then at the base will be brocade moss harvested from the forest. So it's a really big business, and Patricia Muir published a paper on the economics. My paper on what is actually being sold and so on is in the Bryologist, and her paper on the economics of the situation is there. It's a very serious problem, even though in theory it would be possible to harvest them sustainably. I think I didn't find the dealer had a whole lot of interest in that approach. In fact, he got extremely angry with me. I sent him my report when he requested it. He was so furious. He never wanted to see me again, hear from me again. He was just really angry. He'd been really nice, showed me everything. My mother was in her 80s with me, and he showed her everything. And so he thought, of course, I would write a great report on what a wonderful industry this is for West Virginia. So I was really surprised at his attitude, because in the report I suggested we needed to set up experiments for sustainable harvest and so on, but that really wasn't his orientation. Well, in theory, I mean, actually, when we went out in the field and where the Forest Service had sent us, where they thought there had been a lot of harvest, you would see all these gaps in the cover, and you couldn't really tell whether people had pulled them out or it was natural, because mosses are not firmly attached to the substratum. They're weakly held by rhizoids, and they might go from a mat to a rough mat to a weft. They get really heavy, and the center of a colony will fall out, and you've got a gap. And then that gap we could see in the field is being colonized from shoots coming in from the side. So if you did it right, it could be done sustainably.
What do they use for, like, grave log moss, they call it, and dried apple? What kind of moss is used for that?
Sphagnum.
Log moss? The sphagnum moss?
No, what, I didn't quite catch that.
What kind of, like, when they sell log moss for graves and stuff?
Oh, the log moss, what the dealer calls it log moss, although he didn't know the common name, I identified it for him as Hyptum inconans, brocade moss. That's their preferred one, and that's used to be, he said, what he mainly sold. But in more recent years, mostly what he was getting was Thwidium, the delicate fern moss, which is a little looser, won't look quite as nice under that fake fig in the shopping mall. So,
My neighbor used to dry large amounts of moss, like hanging with clothesline.
yes, actually, I have lots of beautiful pictures when I had my lovely tour of the moss dealer in Rennell hanging moss mats from clotheslines. But when I called the Patricia Muir writing the paper on the economics, she reviewed my paper, and she said, you know, you probably better get his permission to publish those pictures. That's his business. And so I called him up, and that's when I discovered that he now hated me. He said, no, you may not use those pictures. So I've never published the pictures. But he had both just unbelievable clothesline after clothesline with these big pelts that represent a whole log hanging from them. And then he had controlled humidity barns where if the conditions weren't right for drying mosses outside, he would do it inside. And he's a big local employer. There were people, you know, with screens going through the mosses, picking out, getting rid of stuff that he didn't think would sell. So, you know, he's a local employer, important local employer. Yeah.
Hey, Sue, thanks for the plug for the Botanic Garden. We have a fall festival, and the fairy garden is my thing. And what we do is the kids come back and they use sticks and nothing live to build a little house. But then I go, after learning this from Sue, I go and harvest little pieces of brocade moss, and we give each of the house builders a little square of moss. What I've seen is we've got several big logs in the area, as you know, And by the next year, they're all covered again.
Oh, that's great.
So
Yeah.
I take a little piece here, then I go find another log. I don't strip a whole log,
Yes.
but the logs are just totally filled in again by the
Yes.
next year. So I feel good about that system.
Yes, yes, and the problem is if you strip an entire log, the log is suddenly going to degrade much faster. If you pull
Yeah.
up a moss vat, you will find all kinds of little grubs, you know,
Lots of
and
stuff there.
yeah, there's lots of stuff, and in fact, I think I show in something relevant to that in another slide. Yeah.
When you mentioned drying mosses, it made me think, what happens to the mosses in winter? Do they go dormant?
Oh, no, actually, they can grow throughout the year. I've got some, I guess I don't have any photos here, but I've got some where they're encased in ice and they look perfectly fine, or covered with snow. Basically, the favorable temperature for photosynthesis will change with the season, so they can really grow opportunistically, although the peak growth is probably fall and spring. They can grow throughout the year, so that's what it means to say they're opportunistic. Yeah, so it's a pretty amazing system. Okay, so ecological importance. There's lots of stuff in mosses, so they're very important in the food chain. And this I took before I left. I had just left a crate with some twigs with lichens on them that I was showing to my community. I was doing a moss lichen walk for the community I live in Asheville, and I just left them on the deck. And a Carolina wren brought in a lot of Thuidium delicatulum and made herself a little nest. So I just left her alone, but I heard, a few days before I left, I heard a crash on the deck, and it was a squirrel crash landing on the table with the crate. So what I did, and I hope this worked, we'll see when I get back, is I ringed the table, which the wrens never landed on, they always landed on the crate, with soapy Vaseline covered with cayenne pepper. And I thought maybe that would discourage the squirrel. The mosses are really very important in bird nests, and in fact, that was my first paper, was bryophytes used in construction of bird nests. It is still being cited, and we keep being given credit for saying that birds are important in dispersing mosses. And actually, although we described that, a slate-covered junco going back and forth between a rock and the nest, it never occurred to us the bigger picture. So we're happy to get credit for having made this important point. But birds do disperse mosses, and all around the world they use mosses in their nests. So this is relevant to, this was in the at Cathedral when it clearly wasn't moss harvesters, because there were all these big mats that were just lying on the ground next to the log, and I asked the ranger there what happened, and he said, well, a bear went through and just ripped the mosses off the logs, some of them, to get the grubs underneath. So they're very, very important in food chains, and they, you wouldn't have, this is endemic to the Carolinas, and you wouldn't have it without the peat mosses. It grows right in among beautiful peat mosses. Okay, so we think of mosses as being important in succession. That's the first thing people think of for mosses and lichens, but it goes way beyond that. And they're famous for being on nurse logs, or a log will be covered with moss, and then if the moss vat is just the right thickness, then a spruce tree or a hemlock might get started there. On the other hand, if it's too thick, the seedling may die. So the mosses interact with the tracheophytes, but it can be either positive or negative. So this is a beautiful fen. You may have been to in Blackwater Falls on the Yellow Trail. I think it's a good local image of the importance of peat mosses, because there is a tremendous amount of carbon in a fen like this, popularly called a bog, but it's strictly speaking, it's not a bog because the water is not primarily from rain, but it's from water flowing through, more like groundwater rather than rainwater. So in this beautiful fin illustrates the point that if you lose a peatland, it's going to have a huge effect. And that's one of the concerns now with what I have learned from the British newspaper The Guardian to call global heating rather than global warming, because it may present the problem more vividly as these mats become oxidized. Immense amounts of carbon is released into the atmosphere. Peat moss has been described as the most important plant in the world because of this effect. But in general, bryophytes store and release great quantities of water and some nutrients. Similarly, lichens can do that as well. Like the lung lichen we'll see can hold quite a bit of nitrogen. People who live in in communities like Hawaii, you might not think that their water comes from moss, but it does. There are mossy rainforests on the tops of the peaks in Hawaii, and the water trickles down below, and that's where they get their drinking water. So on all kinds of scales, mosses are extremely important and ecologically. So this is the last Mosses Extravaganza walk I did at Blackwater Falls State Park, where we advertised this log as the hottest singles bar in the forest. And there were all kinds of beautiful male mosses on this log, which is what I set to look for. And I remember one of the participants saying, "I don't want an old male, I want a young male, I want a young fresh one." Everybody had a good time looking for the male mosses. So we certainly need lots of research on mosses. And my view in terms of the very serious global situation is what we need is just massive global conservation like we've never seen before. I think much better solution than the geoengineering solution that's been suggested, where we put aerosols in the stratosphere and block the sunlight. That's likely to have consequences that are not foreseen. So basically, if we conserve bryophytes in their habitats, that will help us cope with global heating and the glaciers melting and the loss of biodiversity and fresh water. There are extreme problems of today. First, I've had a grand time studying bryophytes and lots of fun interacting with people who have shared the joy. I've had some wonderful interns. Victor Shields is now at the Smithsonian and doing very well. These two students, among my more recent ones, just represent the many herbarium interns I've had. Some of you may have known Bob Burrell. We just had a blast looking at, of all things, crustose lichens in the herbarium. I mean, we were just cracking up. They were just so diverse, it got to seem ridiculous. I mean, they're not ridiculous, of course, but anyway, we just had a lot of fun looking at mosses and lichens in the lab, and then he helped with the curation, and this all helped us in getting almost all the lichens online and some of the mosses, but didn't quite finish that project at the time I retired, but got a good start. So of course, I've had wonderful support from my family as well. Okay, so in terms of recommended references, the actual Manual of the Liverworts of West Virginia is in a journal, so you can get that online and print it out. The older version of Mosses of North America is still a wonderful resource. The most recent one, it's out for the mosses and it's online, so it's free, but it doesn't have every species illustrated, so you really still need the older version. And the liverworts are not out yet, but they're working on it. In terms of popular guides, we are so fortunate now. We have these two books. I recommend both of them. The Common Mosses of the Northeast and Appalachians, Princeton University Press, and then this one by Ralph Pope, Mosses, Liverworts, and Hornworts, has some stunning photography of peat mosses particularly, and it includes some of the common liverworts. So these are two illustrated guides that I would highly recommend. And then in terms of the latest research on bryophytes, this is really a great book. Let's see, can I put this up? I actually, because this isn't guides, but if you're interested in a, not so much ID, but a general understanding of research on bryophytes currently, this is a wonderful book, Introduction to Bryophytes, by some of the leading researchers in the field. Okay, so I think that's it.
Would you put that back, please?
Oh, sure. Okay, I don't know how I timed it so perfectly, but it's noon. Oh, so we will leave from the lobby at 1.